everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Dr. Ivana Stradner, a research fellow with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Dr. Stradner, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much for a kind invitation.
As you and I sit here right now, we are just days away from the 4th anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And I want to discuss where peace talks stand right now, because U.S., Russian, and Ukrainian officials held 2 days' worth of peace talks in Geneva, but both sides said they didn't agree on peace, but they did agree that the negotiations were difficult. So to start off the conversation, what are your takeaways from the trilateral talks?
So whoever believes that such negotiations will go smooth is sorely mistaken, because just look at what happened over the past few days. Putin again, attacked civilian objects, and whoever believes that Putin is willing to stop this war anytime soon is sorely mistaken, because for him, this war is a protracted war, and he's not willing to negotiate in good faith. We just saw over the past few days new reports about Russia poisoning the Russian opposition. We saw numerous reports about, again, attacks on civilian infrastructure. So Putin is just buying more time. And if you look at the scale, how negotiations are moving, Putin has a twofold path. On one side, to ask maximalist demands, knowing that Zelensky cannot accept such demands, and then portraying Ukraine as an unreliable partner to the United States. So that's number one thing. And the second thing is Putin understands perfectly that this war cannot be ended without American support. And he wants to outlast Washington and to make sure that President Trump gets tired of negotiations and leaves this discussion.
I want to talk about when you think that could be, when President Trump is getting tired of talks, tired of trying to negotiate this type of diplomacy, because so many experts have said Putin is not negotiating in good faith. And over the past year, President Trump has wondered publicly numerous times if Putin is stringing him along. And Zelensky posted just recently that Russia is trying to drag out negotiations. I feel that you get the sense that Russia is trying to drag out negotiations, that he is stringing the U.S. along. How long do you think that this will go on with U.S. involvement before President Trump is like, you know what, I'm done here?
So Putin understands very well Washington's mindset, and he understands that President Trump is first and foremost about business. And that's precisely why Putin sent his negotiator over the past few months who has expertise in economy. Why? Because Putin understands that President Trump believes in a win-win strategy. But if you know a little bit about the Kremlin's history of negotiations, for them, negotiations are not I win, you lose. It is about if I have to lose, you have to lose more. And that's precisely a cultural difference that I'm afraid that many people in Washington, D.C. do not understand. But it doesn't stop there. The second thing is Putin is not winning this war, period. He's losing. Period. His economy is not in good terms. So that's precisely why perception matters. And that's why he has been pushing for propaganda, how Russia is actually advancing on the battlefield. And nobody likes a loser. And that's why he has been portraying Ukraine as a loser. So I think President Trump is finally seeing through Putin's lies. But the problem is that to win this war, we need to think strategically. And I'm afraid that many policymakers, whether they are sitting in Washington, Brussels, or London, they are thinking operationally and tactically. Putin only understands one thing, which is the language of power. We should not fear him. Look, I've heard over and over in the West, the START agreement on nukes just ended, Russia might escalate. We should not fear escalation, because for Russia, nuclear threats and nuclear weapons are just another psychological weapon.
I know that you said Putin only understands one thing, and that thing is power. Then, from that perspective, what do you think that the U.S. negotiators involved in this need to do differently? How should they approach this differently? Because President Trump, he long touted that he could end this war in a day. Well, he's been back in his second term now for over a year. Clearly, the war's not ended, and it doesn't seem like it's any closer to being over than over a year ago. So, how do you think the U.S. should approach this?
Number one thing, it's important to understand that we are the superpower and we should not fear Russia. Second thing is that we have to also understand that, as I mentioned, for Putin, this is a protracted war, but even more importantly, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea are building alliance. So this is why we have to help. Now, what we have to do. Talks are cheap, words are cheap. So what we have to do, yes, to continue to negotiate with words, but also if we believe in peace through strength, to be able to tell Putin, if you don't end this war, then we are going to send Ukraine all the weapons that Ukraine needs to put you on the defensive. So then let's make Russia spend time, energy, and resources defending itself. Number two, sanctions. Yes, we impose sanctions, and I applaud Washington for delivering very harsh sanctions on Russia, but there is still room for improvement, including pushing more our allies in Europe also to do more on that front. And the third thing is, Russian military doesn't think like us. They have something what they call a new generation of warfare, which means that the war in Ukraine, it's not only about Ukraine. Russia has already challenged NATO in Poland, in the Baltics by using a hybrid warfare activities, where they're challenging NATO with drones, cutting sea cable. NATO has to put its act together and to put Russia on the defensive and to create finally a feasible strategy to counter Russia, because make no mistake, this war will not end anytime soon unless we end it.
I want to talk about what Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has been saying recently. He sat down with Axios for an interview this week, and he said that it's not fair, those were his words, of President Trump to publicly tell Ukraine and not Russia to make concessions in order to reach peace. And he went on to say in this interview that Ukrainians would never forgive him or the United States if they had to concede the Donbass region to Russia. Is this coming down to this peace deal, these negotiations, to Putin wants the Donbass and Ukraine just will not give that up? Do you think that is the crux of all of this when you boil it down?
When I think how Putin is negotiating, he is asking precisely those maximalist demands, especially about Donbass, knowing that Zelensky cannot accept that, and to portray Ukraine as an unreliable partner to the United States. And that's the part that President Trump has to understand, that when he's negotiating with Russia, we have to understand that sometimes in the West, we think that everyone has to leave negotiations equally and happy. No, everyone has to leave negotiations equally and happy, including Vladimir Putin. And that's precisely, if Putin wants to end this war, he can just pack his stuff and leave. The problem is, as I mentioned, for him, his economy is already a war economy, and he's willing to continue with his imperialistic quest. And he is also a very ego-driven person, surrounded by a yes men who do not tell him the truth about what's happening really on the battlefield. So I think that's also an opportunity for President Trump to deliver some bad news to Vladimir Putin and to tell him that, yes, we provided carrots so far. Maybe it's past time to send some sticks.
Earlier this month, Zelensky said that President Trump gave both Russia and Ukraine a June deadline to reach a peace deal. And based on what we saw from the talks, the Geneva talks, which came after, where both sides characterized them as difficult, paired with the side and the position that we see Russia and Ukraine have now, based on all of that, do you think that that June deadline is realistic? Is that happening?
I don't, and I will tell you why. Even if something is signed in June, that is just going to be a pause for Russia to reposition its military and then to continue. We already heard different deadlines in the past, and that's precisely, what Russia is weaponizing now, negotiations, talking, about asking those maximalist demands so President Trump put more pressure on Ukraine. So objectively, even if anything is signed by June, or in June, that will just be a pause, not the end of this war.
So, what specifically then are you looking out for next when it comes to that June deadline, or when it comes to, I believe both sides indicated that they will continue talks? What are you looking out for next?
What I'm looking for next is that President Trump should stop putting additional pressure on Ukraine and start putting a pressure on Russia. But something else that I'm looking at is actually what's happening on the border with Russia, with other countries in the Baltics and Poland, where Putin is truly trying to show that NATO is a paper tiger, continuing with his hybrid war by actually trying to escalate things and to make sure that all those countries get scared, so they actually put additional pressure on Ukraine to stop the war. We should not fear such provocation because this is an old KGB strategy. And let's also not forget, yes, Putin was a KGB agent, but he was a second-rate KGB agent. So even he is a strategist, he's not a master strategist.
Dr. Stradner, I really appreciate your time today, breaking this down for us all. And as we see developments coming out of Russia and Ukraine, I hope you can join me again. Thank you for the time today.
Thank you very much for your kind invitation.